Thank you, Lascia Corla, and I'm pleased to have the opportunity to speak on the European Migration and Asylum Pact. And just to answer some of the questions that have been asked about what is Europe doing in relation to preventing conflict or easing conflict elsewhere, what are we doing to stem the flow of migration, I think it is important to look at the proportion of the European Peace Facility that is used to try to prevent conflict in Africa, that is tried to reduce the incidence, the duration, the intensity and severity of conflict in Africa, that is used to support the African Union. Indeed, it is a 10% of the European Peace Facility is used for those purposes, and on a range of different measures that come up in an incidental way. But perhaps let me give the House examples. 185 million euros to the African Union mission in Somalia to support the military component of the mission to maintain stability there, for military training facilities and non-lethal equipment for soldiers trained by the European Union training mission, for to 20 million euros to the multinational joint task force against Boko Haram, which of course we would agree, 35 million euros to the Sahel joint force to strengthen the resilience of the joint force. And these are efforts, these are part of the European Union external focus and European Union broader defence policy in the sense of trying to maintain security in the external environment of the European Union, which is essentially an effort to try to support governments to maintain peace, to reduce conflict, both because that is a good thing in itself and to try to prevent migration that doesn't have to occur. And that the European Union does that for humanitarian reasons, it does it for the regional stability, but it is a significant part of the programme. And yes, the bulk of the European Peace Facility goes towards Ukraine, it goes towards maintaining stability in the Western Balkans, and that's extremely important. But I think it really is important to acknowledge that 10% of that is focused on the African Union and support for the African Union, and perhaps we can have a debate in the Dáil about greater detail in relation to this, but it must sit alongside this conversation about the European Union. But you know, as Minister for European Affairs, I am there obviously representing Irish interests, and it is, I would very much believe, in Irish interests that we adopt this pact and that we are part of a collective action across Europe to try to deal with the collective challenge and indeed opportunity presented by migration. Of course, in Ireland we are an open economy, we are entirely reliant on international talent coming to Ireland to work where there are jobs available for people to do. We are in, I think, the proud position of having a workforce that's 18.5% people who were not born in Ireland. That's twice the Eurozone average. I think that's something to be very proud of. I think it has contributed to our culture, contributed to our economy and contributed to our society in very constructive ways, and we will see the benefit of that, of course, over time. Our EU membership in itself has hugely advanced Ireland by making us a more open economy, but more open culturally as well, and open to people coming here and building their lives, to whether to study or to work here, or indeed our people born in Ireland taking the opportunity to live and work anywhere in the European Union. We have a robust employment system, employment permit system to bring in skilled people from outside the EU where gaps remain, especially in critical areas, and of course we have had occasion to extend that list further and further over the last number of years, as we have been in a very tight labour market. But of course, being part of the European Union also gives us broader benefits. Chief among them are being part of the political stability of a continent that has a turbulent and unstable history. Obviously, access to the single market, increased funding and investment opportunities, and better social, environmental and consumer standards. But the real issue, the real task, the real benefit of the European Union is the maintenance of the rule of law, the maintenance of political stability, the maintenance of peace on this continent in circumstances where that has not been the case, and it is something that remains threatened now. And the only way that we can counter that and maintain the values of the European Union, which are entirely at their essence the protection of democracy, the protection of fundamental freedoms, the protection of human rights, is to maintain the rule of law, and is to do that in a collective way. And that's where the Migration Pact is so very important. It enables us to act with solidarity and collectivity. It enables us to act in concert with our friends and colleagues in Italy, in Greece, right across the Baltic states and the Balkan states, where these pressures are much more acute than they have been to date in Ireland. And I think it's really important to understand the pressures that other countries are facing, as well as the pressures that we face ourselves. And in particular, I'm minded all of the time to think about my colleagues from Estonia, from Latvia and from Lithuania, who have experienced not just the sort of migration that we have experienced, which is secondary country movement, but from people coming from very difficult circumstances, but a different type of migration as well, and that is instrumentalised migration, or let's call it weaponised migration, where we have seen, and our colleagues in the Baltic states have seen repeatedly, hundreds and hundreds of people being flown to Belarus, being bussed to the borders of Lithuania and other places, and literally being pushed across the borders in a way that is done deliberately to destabilise those countries and those economies and those peoples, amplified by social media and messages on social media that this is not that this is a bad thing and an unwelcome thing. This is the sort of weaponised migration that other countries are facing. And it is part of the conflict with Russia, and they are very clear that this is what is happening, and that is happening obviously at the same time as cyber attacks and a whole other range of destabilising measures. At the same time, we also have then the effect of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which has displaced some 4 million people to leave their homes and seek refuge in the EU and neighbouring countries, quite apart from the weaponised form that I'm speaking about elsewhere. So it is quite clear that for lots of different reasons, both because of broad conflict, because of climate change, because of instrumentalised, weaponised migration, and because of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, we have a migration problem that greatly supersedes our ability to act alone. And the only possible way of managing this process in both a rules-based, rule of law way that respects human rights, that protects individuals on a pan-European basis, and allows us to ensure that our values of democracy, human rights and fundamental freedoms are applied to all of those scenarios. The only way that we can do that is to opt into this and to act in a collective measure. By opting in, our laws will for the first time be aligned with the EU for the first time. And I don't understand, I do understand the very deep and the very good and constructive dialogue that is being had about the details of it, and that's very important, and there's clearly a series of measures to be advanced in this House on some of the greater detail. But I don't see the articulation of a serious alternative to managing this difficulty. And I don't believe and I think that Ireland having participated in this work for a very long time in a constructive and collaborative way in the European Union, if it is to be criticised or if it is to be said it is not to be done, it is important that alternatives are given. I was very disappointed by Pierce Doherty, for example, last week, saying on radio, asking about the extension or otherwise, or what would happen when the Temporary Protection Directive would come to an end next March, and what would Ireland do and what was Ireland's plan at that point. Of course, Ireland, it is a European Union competence whether or not the directive is extended or otherwise. It is not a matter for the Irish government on its own. So the question of whether it is extended was not considered by him. The question of what would be happening in Ukraine at that point was not considered by him. And his suggestion at that point, not 2 or 3 days after the local elections, was that we should send Ukrainian people back to safe parts of Ukraine, as though any of us are able to identify what those safe parts of Ukraine are today, next week, or indeed several months from now. But it's that sort of very, very, very unhelpful sort of commentary that dilutes the genuine dialogue that is happening about a serious issue that is going to become part of our political dialogue over the next 10 and 20 years as we deal with the effects of climate change. And we have to deal with it in a serious and collective way, one that commits us as part of Europe to the European project together, commits us to the values of Europe, and deals with it in a serious and collective way. So if people have objections with it, they should provide alternatives, and they should do so in a serious and constructive way. I, for one, am pleased that the European Union has put this together, that we will have the opportunity to act collectively, and I think it's important that we see that we opt in as we are doing. Thank you.